And on PM Express tonight, something very key to the next government that will be inaugurated on January 7th. Because if you monitor the elections that just ended, you would see that people say it was close to a hung parliament. So what will the 8th parliament look like? And that is what we're going to be interrogating tonight. Managing a split parliament, building consensus for an effective legislature. Of course, as we begin to digest and understand the dynamics of the elections that just ended, the country continues to deal with the fallout of the just ended presidential and parliamentary elections. But one key conversation that has featured strongly is how the 8th parliament will look like after such a closely contested parliamentary elections. And let's just go through, for the sake of our viewers, the composition in parliament over the years. And I start from 1992, where the NDC had 189 seats. And then, you remember in that election held in November, the NPP, opposition NPP, boycotted the parliamentary elections. So we ended with 109 seats, 2 for the other parties, total 200 people in parliament. Fast forward 1996, 60 seats for NPP. If we could just go back to that table for me, 60 for the NPP, 133 for the NDC, 7 for the other parties, and we had 200 people, parliamentarians. Government majority then was 43. In 2000, we had 100 for the NPP, 92 for the NDC. The others had 8, and the others had 2. And then the total is 200. You get government majority, which is 8. 2004, 128 people for MPs for NPP. You had 94 for NDC. You had 7 for the others, 230 MPs. Government majority comes to 34. Let's go to 2008, and you have NPP gaining 107 seats in parliament, NDC 116, 7 for the others, 213 total, and you have 9 for the government majority. So 9 was what they had above the minority MPs. In 2012, NPP had 121, NDC 148, others had 5, total 275, and you had government majority of 27. In 2016, the NPP had 169 members of parliament. NDC had 106. We didn't have any from any other party. And then the total came to 275 because, as you may recall, before the 2016 elections, we had splits. We had more. I mean, that was even in 2012. We had 275 constituencies, which was some addition to what we had in 2008. So in the last elections, you had the governing NPP with government majority of 63. That's a lot compared to all the years I've spoken about. Now, fast forward to 2020. NPP has 137 in parliament. NDC 136. We have 1 independent candidate. And as you may know, there is 1 in contention, the Senate West seat, which is yet to be declared. Total 275. And if you look at 137 and 136, you have 1 as government majority. How would this look like in parliament? Just so you may know, the MPs that will be falling out, who is coming in, who is coming out in the 8th parliament, at least 108 out of the 275 members of the 7th parliament will not return to the House. This is because for the NPP, for instance, let's see how many people. It's because some lost their primaries, some also lost in the December 7 elections, and some are retiring. Let's see how many are going for NPP and how many are going for NDC. 41 NPP incumbent MPs lost their primaries, 32 lost their seats in the December 7 elections, and 4 are retiring, totaling 78 out of 169 the NPP had in the 7th parliament. For the NDC, you have 10 MPs losing in the primaries, 15 losing in the December 7 elections, while 7 are retiring, totaling 32 out of the 106 seats it had in the 7th Parliament. And I'm sure there's another conversation brewing. Who is the next Speaker of Parliament? And we've been monitoring and watching the conversation. A number of names are popping up. The first name that is popped up is Jones Doche Maulom, who's a Supreme Court judge. He worked as a state attorney with the Attorney General's Department, served as the president of the Volta Region Bar of Ghana Bar Association, became a High Court judge in June 2002, became a judge in the Court of Appeals in September 2003, sworn in as Justice of Supreme Court in the Gambia, and in February same year, sworn in as Justice of the Supreme Court of Ghana. These are some of the names popping up. The other name you need to watch out is Nia Ikwe Otu, who is a lawyer and politician. He was very instrumental in the 2012 election petition as a leading member of the NPP legal team. He served as Attorney General and Minister of Justice of Ghana in the John Agyekum Kufuor administration. Currently, Ghana's High Commissioner to Canada is also another name you should be watching out for. Papa Owusu Ankomah, lawyer and politician, once chairman of the Western Regional Branch of the NPP, served as MP for the Sekondi constituency from 1996 to 2016, served as Ghana's High Commissioner to the UK and Ireland. And the current Speaker of Parliament for the 7th Parliament, we hear, is still lobbying, or there's been lobbying around for him to retain his seat and continue with the 8th Parliament. So he's a Speaker of Parliament. He's senior member of the Ghana Bar Association, and he served as a member of Parliament for Dom Kwabenya constituency from 2004 to 2012 until he decided not to go again. Tonight, this is the conversation we will be interrogating. And what are we looking at? Building consensus for an effective legislature. I'll be joined already in the studio. I have Dr. Rashid Rahman, who is the Executive Director of the Africa Center for Parliamentary Affairs. I'll also be joined by former Deputy Attorney General Dominic Ayine, who will be joining us shortly, and also a political science lecturer at the University of Ghana, Dr. Ali Duseidu. They will be joining us for this conversation. Let me start quickly with you, Dr. Dramani. This is the first time we're seeing, the seats in Parliament inching this close. Of course, the closest we've had with government majority is, I think, in 2008 when the government majority was just 8. This time, government majority is just 1. Did you see this coming as we were getting closer to the polls?
Given the numbers that the NDC, the MPP had in the 7th Parliament, given the numbers that the MPP had in the 7th Parliament, and given how the campaign went, I think most of us did not think that we were going to wake up on December 7 with numbers that are this very close and this very tight. To be honest with you, I know we live in a country where our polls are not very accurate. The polls that were coming out and the conversations that were taking place at the time, many people did not give the opposition any chance. So it was, for most people, a very big surprise.
Now, as it stands, we are saying that the NPP has 137 in Parliament, NDC 136, and still awaiting Sine West. So this is the picture we are seeing. If the Sine West comes in and it goes to the NPP, they're going to get 138 and against 136. If Sine goes to NDC, they're going to be splitting 137 each. The independent candidate, of course, we know, fell out from the NPP. The likelihood is he may join the NPP. So that may give NPP 138. But if he refuses to join and joins NDC, then it's 138, 137. This is going to be very interesting in Parliament. What's your own interpretation of what is going on?
You know, Aisha, if however you look at it, whether Senate West goes to NDC or it goes to MPP, we are going to have a situation where, as you rightly said, it's just one or two seats that would divide the two parties. However you look at it, I think we are going to have to deal with a very interesting if parliament. If the elections were decided on December 7, and we all have moved on as a country, then I would have been very quick to say that what we are going to see in the 8th Parliament is going to be very interesting and is going to be working in our favor. I mean, that is, I'm talking about us as citizens who have hired our members of Parliament, because in situations where no one party has an overwhelming majority, in most parliaments that I have seen around the world, it makes for a lot of consensus. It makes for a lot of dialogue, because you know you cannot ignore the minority. You know you will need some support in order to get pieces of legislation passed and so on. So if we're in a situation where elections were decided on December 7, no contentions, I mean, no issues about, I mean, who concedes and who doesn't concede, no challenges to both the presidential and the parliamentary results, then this would have been very clean and we would have been seeing some interesting dynamics. But given what we are seeing up to this point, we are not too sure who is even going to have the majority in parliament. We are not too sure whether the opposition leader or former president is going to concede and accept that the current president has won. These issues are going to linger on, and they are going to affect the way NDC MPs would interact with their colleagues from the MPP, as well as the way they would interact with the executive. Because here is an executive that they say they don't recognize up to this point, and we don't know when that recognition is going to come, if it will ever come. If it becomes a legal battle in court, we don't know how long that's going to take.
42.
Well, I mean, that's
72 hours.
Well, I mean, that's the assurance that we got from the Supreme Court. But I mean, if history is anything to go by, I mean, the last time it took the country about 8 to 9 months to resolve this. Yeah.
So of course, we cannot believe in that yet until we get there.
Well, until we get there, and so because of all these, I think we are going to have a situation in the 8th Parliament, given the split. That will be very interesting, and if we are not careful, we are going to see a lot of gridlock. We are going to see a lot of gridlock. Okay. Yeah.
That's the reason why we need to manage the situation very well. Thankfully, I'm joined by former Deputy Attorney General Dr. Dominic Ayine, who is also MP for Bolgatanga East, if I'm right. Congratulations, sir. Thanks so much for joining us. What would you describe, or how would you describe the 7th Parliament? And of course, from the way things have gone, how should we expect the 8th Parliament to be? Dr. Ayine, are you on? Hello, Dr. Ayine. If you can hear me, I'm just asking how you would describe the 7th Parliament and what we should expect the 8th Parliament to look like. Okay, so we'll try and fix his sound and then he will get back on the show. Dr. Alidu is also on the other side. Doc, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Aisha.
Dr. Alidu, prior to the elections, I know you've been conducting a lot of researches into the activities of politicians and how the electorates respond to some of these activities. Did you see it coming that the parliamentary seat will be split the way it has been done?
Thank you so much. I think the Department of Political Science did a survey in some time back in the year, and it suggested that a lot of constituents, members of the constituencies, the 275 constituencies, were not happy with their members of parliament. It suggested that most of their MPs were not visiting the constituencies regularly. They were not answering their phones. They were not consulting the people. They were not bringing them developmental projects that were supposed to come their way or as promised by these MPs. So the research concluded that if care wasn't taken, majority of sitting MPs were going to lose their seats. It became a very huge banter between the department and the members of parliament. And they believed that we didn't do the work well. We didn't consult parliament to know the realities on the ground, and what we're predicting was just farce. So I think the first indication we had was that majority of sitting MPs were going to lose their seats, but we didn't know, we couldn't tell whether it was going to be this close. The second indicator was after the primaries of the New Patriotic Party, about 65 MPs, sitting MPs, were made to go uncontested. Now they were protected. And those who were not protected, majority of them lost their seats. So the indication was that those who were protected, if they were not protected, there was a chances that they were going to lose. And if the delegates didn't want to vote for them, then it suggests that in the main elections, they will still wait and take their pound of flesh. And as part of that particular decision to let 65 MPs go unopposed, a lot of the people contested that particular decision. Some wanted to go independent, and in some cases, it became a huge issue between the sitting MP and then the district chief executive, or in some cases, the sitting MPs who has lost their primaries, and then the PC who had won, and then the MDC or MCE at that particular area. Sometimes it was the PC, the MCE, and then the constituency executive. So there was a lot of tension within the rank and file of the governing party as far as the parliamentary primaries were concerned. And we knew that if care wasn't taken, this was going to translate into how the major elections in December was going to be held. So there were a lot of indications from both the political science department survey, but also the fallout from the MPP primary suggested that a lot of things were not right. In some cases, maybe it was too late to correct it. In other cases, I believe people thought people were just being complacent. So there were indications that something was going to happen, like the number of MPs, sitting MPs, where there would be a lot of attrition, but we were not very certain whether it would be this close. So the figures we are having now is a little bit of a shock, but the fact that this was going to happen, majority of MPs was going to lose their seat, was something that we anticipated.
But of course, whichever way you put it, the NDC performed marvelously in these elections. Looking at where they are coming from, 106 seats from Parliament to 136. That's good performance. What would you say worked for the NDC?
So one, it could be that because it is an opposition party, majority of the people were not demanding so much from them. They will assume that, oh, my party is in opposition. If my party was in government, it would have been very easy for me to lobby these developmental projects and bring it to you. But because my party is in opposition, it's hardly difficult. But also, most of the NDC MPs were not also serving in deputy and ministerial positions. So they had a little bit of time compared to their counterparts in the MPP, who doubled as ministers and deputy ministers. So most of them were able to touch base with their constituencies. Most of them were able to visit regularly. Most of them were able to dialogue with them and then to actually let them ventilate their grievances, which was recorded and subsequently dealt with. On the other hand, the MPP MPs, most of them were very busy. They were either ministers or deputy ministers, and it took away most of their time. And most of them were not able to go to the constituency level. And some people, because maybe they got so busy, they've forgotten that it was the constituents that brought them to Parliament House and not the government of the day that they were working with as a minister or deputy minister. So that was the first major point of departure between the incumbent government MPs and then opposition MPs. But the second also had to do with the fact that a lot of people were not happy because of the manipulations that went into the manner in which the primaries were conducted. People were not happy. In some cases, incumbents spent so much money, incumbents undermined other candidates that wanted to contest. And I also mentioned the fact that about 65 of them were insulated from competition. And people were not happy with them. And the signs were that if they had contested, they were going to lose. But you see, it is often easier to lose primaries and know that you are not going to win the major elections than to feel that you are going to win because you are protected and then you go and lose. So if you look at the difference, the expectations on NDC MPs was far lesser than the expectations on an incumbent MPs because people believe you are in government, so you should be able to do A, B, C, D. But a lot of the constituents were also dissatisfied with the fact that they were being neglected or their MPs were not visiting the constituency. So it could also be the fact that their performance at that particular level was admired or was repulsive, and a lot of other contributing factors that might have made the NDC to be able to move that particular appreciate in the number of MPs that they have in Parliament.
Let me bring back Dr. Dominic Ayeni, who has joined us again. Doc, I'm sure you're excited about your performance, but earlier I wanted you to explain to me how would you describe the 7th Parliament and what would be your expectation of the 8th Parliament, looking at how things have turned out?
Thank you very much. And sorry for the technological hitch that did not allow me to participate from the beginning. I think that by and large, the 7th Parliament was not radically different from the previous parliaments in the sense that we had a dominant majority, and that majority used its position by and large to assist the executive, in achieving every objective achieving its aims and objectives as far as legislative action was concerned. So whether it related to bills that came before the House or agreements, dealing with government contracts and so on, the majority by and large used its position to assist the executive branch, to achieve its objectives. And so I don't think that it was radically different from previous parliaments, whether we are dealing with appointments, approval of nominees of the president and so on and so forth. However, when it comes to the 8th Parliament, I have always been excited about the prospect of having an executive that does not have a majority in Parliament. And I kept telling my students of law that would be the day when our democracy would mature. Somehow or another, we are there and not there yet, in the sense that with this 8th Parliament, there is a bit of uncertainty with respect to how many seats the NDC has or will have, and then how many seats the MPP will have. But whatever the case, the majority that we have now, the seats that have been certified by the Electoral Commission, shows quite clearly that there is going to be a very, very, very slim, majority in Parliament. Whether you're talking about a majority on the part of the NDC or a majority on the part of the MPP. And in that wise, there will be a lot of, consensus building on the way forward. Because in terms of the composition of committees, in terms of, decision making on the floor at plenary, there will be the need for us to cross party lines, and make sure that whatever decision is going to be taken, if it is going to affect, the welfare of the people of this country in a significant way, we have to achieve consensus before we take that decision. So for me, I think that the 8th Parliament is going to be much more exciting. There's going to be the need for us to build bridges. And I don't think that the executive branch of government will ever take Parliament for granted in the next 4 years.
Dr. Rashid Draman is nodding over here, but how would you also describe the 7th Parliament? We've had a number of issues, issues of corruption, issues of, I mean, so many of them. How would you assess the 7th Parliament?
You know, any assessment of the 7th Parliament must, I think, be based on some empirical data. I don't want to make any pronouncements here that are just based on emotions and so on. We are currently in the process of doing some research to assess the current Parliament. Having said that, on the basis of simple observation and interacting with Parliament as we do in the conduct of our business, I think I would say this 7th Parliament, we've seen a lot of drama.
Okay.
I mean, it has been characterized by a lot of drama. I mean, we've seen a lot of walkouts from the minority. We've seen instances where, you know, a lot of bills, particularly financial agreements that have been approved. We've had a lot of noise, particularly from the opposition, whether justified or not justified, as, for instance, with the Ajapa agreement, which was the most recent. If you look at the positive side, I think the Right Honourable Speaker, Michael Quay, in his inaugural speech when he was taking the reins of power as the Speaker of Parliament, promised that he was going to make sure that for the first time in our history, in our legislative history, we are going to have private members' bills, so that in a way Parliament has some say in the legislative agenda rather than all bills coming from, emanating from the executive.
Yeah.
I think he has fulfilled that.
Okay.
I mean, from my checks, I think currently there are a number of private members' bills, even if not passed yet.
Okay.
At least we have a number of private members' bills that are there. I mean, having said all these, I think if you look at the most important, in my opinion, role of a member of Parliament, which is holding government to account, ensuring that our resources are spent judiciously, I think over the years, our Parliament has not done quite creditably. I'm not talking about this Parliament, I mean this 7th Parliament alone.
Okay.
2 parliaments ago, we did a number of studies.
That should be the 5th Parliament.
Yes, about the 5th Parliament or so, 5th or 6th Parliament, no, 5th Parliament. We did a study which looked at, you know, measuring the performance of 7 parliaments on the continent, including our own.
Okay.
The parliaments of East Africa, Kenya and Uganda in particular, they came out, I mean, on top, and they did quite creditably when it comes to holding government to account, particularly financial oversight and so on. And what explained that was because, you know, these parliaments have what we call the Parliamentary Budget Office, which is a kind of specialized unit within a parliament that provides technical support, so that when members are scrutinizing financial agreements, when members are scrutinizing the budget and so on, technical support is provided to them. We try to do that here in our Parliament. The 6th Parliament, there was an effort to set up the scrutiny unit. That was almost done before the 6th Parliament was dissolved. In the 7th Parliament, there have been efforts to make sure that this scrutiny unit becomes quite operative and functions in order to perform the role that was envisaged for it. I haven't seen very much in terms of that. So I'm sure that if we did the same study that we did about 6-7 years ago and compare our country to maybe the countries of East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and so on, I don't think that the results are going to be very much different. But we are in the process of conducting some research, and on the basis of that, we can make very firm and clear pronouncements in terms of where our Parliament stands. I mean, that's the 7th Parliament in terms of its performance, and particularly for us, Our interest is more kind of looking forward, reform kind of oriented, looking at where the gaps are and trying to see what are the lessons that could be passed on to the 8th Parliament, particularly a very interesting Parliament that we are going to see.
Dr. Ayine, how do you feel about the assessments that the 7th Parliament did not really perform creditably? And what would you lay your hands on as, immediately as the lows of the 7th Parliament?
Well, I think by and large, I do agree with the assessment that, Dr. Dramani has made of the Parliament. As I said, I basically said that, in general terms, the 7th Parliament was not different from previous parliaments. I think that was, being very general. I think he went down into the specifics. For instance, our scrutiny of budgets have been very, very poor. And I have had the opportunity, to make that point very clear on the floor of Parliament and at committee, that the way we pass almost everything that comes by way of, the appropriations bill, right, without, a lot of scrutiny, is worrying, because sometimes when that happens, then you are basically giving the executive branch of government a free rein with respect to the use of public resources. For instance, one issue that I raised, I think that was at committee, was when the COVID relief request came from the Minister of Finance. I made it very clear that I did not like the general manner in which the request came. I actually did, study some legislation, the bills that went to the UK Parliament with respect to COVID relief, and then also the bills that went to the US Congress. Okay, and I had examples of that to give at the committee level, that we needed some level of specificity with respect to how the COVID funds were going to be used. Now, that advice was not heeded. We basically gave the Minister of Finance a blank check with respect to how to use the COVID funds. As we speak now, Aisha, he has not accounted to Parliament, though the Constitution requires that where you have emergency or contingency spending, then there is a requirement that the minister must come back to Parliament and then specifically account for how the money was used. Somehow that provision has been misinterpreted to mean that it is only when the minister comes back during the mid-year review that, or with the next budget session, that he will be accounting. But that the mid-year review did not give us an opportunity for that accounting to take place. And I don't think that this year's budget, will also provide that opportunity. So I agree with Dr. Rahman that we need to set up with respect to especially how we approve, appropriations, for government departments.
Be it as it may, for the past few years, people have been worried and concerned about the quality of Parliament. It looks like a lot will happen in this 8th Parliament, because about 108 members of Parliament are exiting. Number of them are very experienced. You can talk of the like of Alban Bagbin, Inusa Hussaini, Professor John Baffour, and all these hands that are leaving Parliament. How would the 8th Parliament, and a lot of new ones coming in, how would it look like for the new Parliament, the 8th Parliament?
Well, it's quite worrying, honestly, if you look at the attrition rate. You had your statistics before we started the program. And, if you look at the data, even before we went to December 7, I think Parliament had already lost about 60 MPs. 41 from the MPP primaries, another, I think, 8 or so from the NDC primaries, and then the retirees, I think we had about 11 put together from the MPP.
So you had about 73 from the NPP and about 41 from the
Yeah, NDC. That's in total, but I'm talking about even before we went to December 7.
Those who lost their primaries.
Yes. And then those who were retiring, we knew that already a number of people, MPs, were not coming back. Then on December 7, we lost about 50 or so. And then, So if you look at that, we are, I think, standing at about 40+% in terms of the attrition rate. You add this to a situation where in our parliament, we have a constitutionally induced marriage between the executive and the legislature, whereby many MPs are taken from the House to become ministers. They are ministers in the afternoon, they are members of parliament in the morning. This doesn't augur well for legislative performance because we are not creating career legislators. So when you have this high attrition rate coming on the back of this constitutional arrangement that we have, then you are in a situation where every 4 years, the business of parliament, I mean, I hear people say, the losses that we saw would not break the back of parliament, would not make parliament dysfunctional and so on. But certainly it's going to slow down, the way our parliament performs its functions.
Okay.
I mean, the budget is going to come before the House, whether you are a new MP or you are an old MP. I mean, you have no excuse to say, because I'm new, I can't scrutinize the budget. Agreements are going to come right from day one.
So a lot of them are now going to be in the learning process.
In the learning process. And then if you add that to the fact that most of them are also going to be, in a situation where they have divided attention, because you are half executive, half member of parliament, then it compounds the situation.
Yes.
And that is why I think I support people like the majority leader when they say, necessarily some seats and some individuals will have to be protected. But I think the way it was done, I'm talking about both the NDC and the MPP, I would say was not, perhaps they didn't use the appropriate mechanisms.
Okay.
You have to define your legislative agenda as a party, and you have to agree on what you want to do in the coming parliament. And then on the basis of that, agree as a party, we need to protect A, B, C, D seats. And then start the negotiations within the party so that by the time you get to the primaries, you will not have people very angry and saying, I'm going independent, I'm quitting the party, and so on and so forth.
Like what happened with the former MP.
And then now we have seen the fallout.
Okay, yeah.
We live in a country where our constitution doesn't, if you like, give us the luxury of, for instance, maybe what is practiced in some other countries, where maybe the elections to the legislature are staggered in a way that, it's not all the members of parliament that are presented for elections at the same time. So you go for midterm, if you lose some MPs, you gain some. The new ones, when they come to the House, there will still be some old hands
to educate them. Take them through.
If we are not careful as a country and we continue this way without the parties doing proper in-house negotiations ahead of the primaries and so on, we are going to wake up one day and we would have a parliament that is completely new. I have seen this in some countries. In Senegal, in their last elections, 95% of MPs disappeared.
Wow.
In Burkina Faso recently, they had their elections about 2 weeks before us. About 70% did not come back. In Botswana, recently they also had elections, a similar kind of percentage. So if you look at our situation, it's not quite bad, relatively speaking, if you look at the African context. But what is not going well for us is the fact that we have this induced marriage between the executive and the legislature. Because in some of the countries that I've cited, like in Burkina Faso, if you're a minister, you cannot be a member of parliament.
Yeah.
Go to parliament, focus on the work of parliament. In Senegal, it's the same thing. And I think in our country, we still have this marriage and we are still looking for divorce. Up to now, we haven't had the divorce. So,
and I realized that whilst you were making the point about the experience, Hans, Dr. Ayine was actually in support with what you were saying. I'll take a break on PM Express. When I return, I'll be gauging Dr. Ayine's mood on this because he is in the soup and he knows how business is conducted in Parliament. How does he foresee that the experienced hands who are leaving would affect their work? Would also be looking at, be it as it may, whichever way you toss the coin, there is 137 and 138. Even if it becomes 138 and 136 or 137 and 137, there is still a very, very close margin. How should majority MPs and minority MPs behave in Parliament so we can build a consensus without any acrimony, so business of the House can go on smoothly? I'll be right back. Welcome back to PM Express. Dr. Rashid Rahman is the Executive Director of the Africa Center for Parliamentary Affairs. Dr. Dominic Ayine is the former Deputy Attorney General and Member of Parliament for Bolga East. And Dr. Alidu Seidu is a political science lecturer at the University of Ghana. And before I went on that break, we were talking about how to build consensus so we can have business of the House go on without acrimony. Let me go to Dr. Ayine. You heard that Dr. Rashid Rahman explained how Parliament will be affected because we're losing all these experienced hands. You are in it. How would this impact on your work?
Yes, certainly it is going to significantly affect the way we conduct business, both at plenary and at committee. And then, we have a significant number of senior members still in the House. We have Chairman Sabonsu, we have Haruna Idrisu, and Honorable Muntaka, and so on. It depends on how fast the newcomers are willing to learn, both in terms of the work that we conduct at committee and then the work that is conducted at plenary. And so there is a need for leadership to take very seriously the component of training of new persons who come. And then also they must also, individually take the initiative to try to learn. For instance, when I got to Parliament, the first time, I had to choose my own mentors, people like Honorable Alban Sumani Bagbin. Then I had Honorable Yele Chire, and anytime I had issues with respect to either procedure or in terms of substance of what I was going to say or my contributions and so on, I walked up to them and then asked for their advice. So I think that is going to be the way to go, because if we have a significant number of newcomers who must learn by the ropes, they have to learn very fast. And in trying to learn very fast, they must learn from those who have the experience. And the work of Parliament mostly is in the committee, at the committee level. So there is committee leadership. And most of them, when they come, they need to work with the leadership and ask questions about how to go about the conduct of the business of Parliament. I think that, we still have a substantial number of persons in Parliament with experience to be able to carry along the newcomers who are coming.
Dr. Alidu Seidu, I'll be coming to you briefly, but let me get your thoughts on this. How should both sides conduct themselves, especially the majority, so that business of the House can go on effectively, efficiently, without acrimony?
I think...
Well, okay, sorry. I thought the question was posed.
Yes, Dr. Alidu, I'll come to you just briefly. Let me let Doc in. Yes, Doctor.
Yes.
Aisha, it is very clear that the Constitution gives us the basic principle in terms of the conduct of parliamentary or governmental business. And that is the assessment of whether or not what we are going to do or say will enhance the welfare of the people of this country. I think that all of us, as parliamentarians, as lawmakers, must have that principle in mind. I call it the grand welfare principle in Article 1 of the Constitution. And so we must all be guided by that. Most of the time, what happens is the partisan interest takes, precedence over the national interest or the collective welfare. Now that we have a situation where there will be the need to build consensus, and no one party, can ride roughshod, over the other, then I think that principle will be taken more seriously. Aisha, one of the structural deficiencies of our Constitution is the fact that it does not require a supermajoritarian, it does not impose a supermajoritarian requirement on taking certain key national decisions. I, for instance, would have thought that the makers of the Constitution would have required that for the budget to be approved, there's a need for that to have two-thirds majority of the Parliament. Currently, what we require to approve.
Okay, I think we lost Dr. Ayine there, but that's what you get when you have 3 doctors on your show. Okay, so you just make that point for me. How should both sides conduct themselves?
I think for me, there is a need for a lot of pragmatism, I think, on both sides. Remember when we went to elections on December 7, the way I interpret the results, if you look at it very carefully, in 2016, MPP won by about 10% because we had a voter population of about 10 million and they had a margin of about 1 million. In 2020, the voter population was about 13 million, those who actually voted. And you take 500,000 of it, that's about 3% or so. The message is, you lost 500,000 of the floating voters that you got in 2016. NDC tried to see whether they could overcome that deficit and perhaps even maybe build on it in order to wrestle power from the MPP. We saw the difference, even though still contested, between the former president and the current president of about 500,000. So for me, there is what I call the 500,000, 500,000 voter effect that we saw. And in it, there is a clear message that citizens are not happy with both the MPP and the NDC. Because if they were happy with the NDC, they would have, it would have been maybe one shot, and maybe if the margin is clear and decisive, there wouldn't be any contest, and vice versa. So for me, what this says is that despite all the challenges that we are going through and we are likely to see in the next parliament, it calls for a lot of pragmatism on both sides. To make sure that, I think, on a number of very important issues, they put the interests of the citizens of this country first.
Okay. And
find a middle ground to work together and come to some consensus.
Okay. Let me bring in Dr. Alidu here. Doc, what's your expectation of the 8th Parliament?
I think my senior colleagues have already mentioned all the things.
For the sake of time, be a bit brief for me.
Yes, pragmatism, consensus building, all in the interest of what? The citizens who have voted them to go to parliament. Because at the end of the day, they will retain them or get them out of parliament. So the interest of the people should be paramount, and the consensus building should be around the interest of the people.
I'm grateful that you all joined us. Unfortunately, we are not able to veer into the names that have popped up for the Speaker of Parliament, but this is surely a conversation that has started. We would have this conversation until the 8th Parliament is inaugurated, as the 7th Parliament is about to be dissolved. So this is certainly a conversation that we'll come back to. Thank you so much, Dr. Dramani. Thank you, Dr. Halidu Seidu, and thank you, Dr. Ayeni, for joining. My name is Aisha Ibrahim. Many thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of our programs.